This is what Earth looked like after the most catastrophic event in the last 500 million years of life on this planet. It was a catastrophe that brought with it a silence nobody talks about when reminiscing this time, but we're here to cover that. Today, let's learn about the asteroid that ended the age of dinosaurs was approximately 12 kilometers wide. For scale, it wasn't large by asteroid standards, but the dinosaurs unfortunately had no frame of reference. It struck what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico at roughly 20 kilometers per second, releasing energy estimated at 2 million times the most powerful nuclear weapon ever detonated. In the first seconds, everything within 1,000 kilometers of the impact site simply ceased to exist. Then what followed was not a single disaster, but a sequence of them, arriving in layers, each one more comprehensive than the last. For example, the initial impact sent debris into the upper atmosphere at such velocity that, on re-entry, it heated the air to temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. The sky, in effect, became a grill, and forests ignited simultaneously across entire continents. The oceans, at least their upper layers, began to boil, and anything on the surface, any animal large enough to be visible from a short distance, was gone within hours. Then came the dust. Billions of tons of pulverized rock and soot were launched into the upper atmosphere, where they spread and settled into a layer dense enough to block sunlight almost entirely. In a nutshell, it was horror. Photosynthesis stopped. It didn't slow down, it stopped. And because plants were unable to access sunlight, they began to die. The food chains built on those plants collapsed from the bottom up. And in the space of a few weeks, the Earth went from a world teeming with life to something that barely qualified as habitable. That is what scientists today call a mass extinction event. But we can promise you the technical language does not quite capture what it looked like on the ground. The phenomenon that followed the impact is known today as nuclear winter, a term borrowed from models developed during the Cold War to predict what a large-scale nuclear exchange would do to the planet's climate. The asteroid just did it first, and did it more thoroughly. So, in the months that followed, given that there was no sunlight, global temperatures dropped sharply, meaning regions that had been warm and forested became cold and dark overnight. Basically, the planet went quiet in a way it had not been quiet since before complex life existed. Nearly every medium and large animal on Earth was dead within the first year from starvation, from cold, and the dinosaurs, of course, after 160 million years of dominance over this planet, were gone as well. What then survived at the time was, by almost any measure, the least impressive life on Earth at the time. They included small mammals hidden in burrows, a handful of bird species that had somehow found enough to eat, crocodiles nearly motionless at the bottom of rivers because their metabolism slowed to almost nothing, and microorganisms in the deep ocean, far enough below the surface to be insulated from most of what was happening above them. That was it. That was the inheritance. But as we would come to find out soon enough, life does not disappear easily. Perhaps the most important thing about the fossil record is the restoration process. During this period, we know that the dust settled slowly, light returned in fragments, not full and immediate sunlight, and the first living thing to respond was the fern. That's why ferns are regarded among the most resilient plants on Earth. They do not need rich soil, they do not need stable temperatures, and they can grow in conditions that would kill almost anything else. In the fossil record, the layer of rock immediately above the impact boundary is almost entirely fern spores. That is a phenomenon so consistent across impact sites worldwide that scientists have named it the fern spike. So the ferns came first, and they covered the planet. Then gradually, beneath and between them, other plants followed. Mosses, flowering plants, and then slowly but surely the ground that had been bare and gray began to carry color again. However, the process was not fast. Recovery from a mass extinction does not happen on a human timescale, or even on the timescale of civilizations. It rather happens across thousands and then hundreds of thousands of years, increment by increment, with each species creating conditions that allow the next to follow. For example, the oceans recovered because plankton populations slowly rebuilt themselves, then rivers began running clean, soil that had been poisoned by acid rain slowly regained its chemistry, and the air became breathable for animals that required more than the bare minimum to function. So, though the world that was returning was not the same world that had existed before the impact, no one expected it to be. All that was needed, undeniably, was a simple world to begin with. For 160 million years before, mammals had been, to put it generously, an afterthought. Small, nocturnal, and spending most of their evolutionary energy trying not to be eaten by the animals that now no longer existed. Then the asteroid arrived, and suddenly the entire planet was available. What followed was one of the fastest and most dramatic evolutionary expansions in the fossil record. Being freed from the constraints of a world built around large reptilian predators and herbivores, mammals began diversifying at a rate that had no precedent in their history. Species that had been rat-sized began producing descendants the size of wolves, then horses, then the ancestors of the largest land animals alive today. Surviving birds that were once small, adaptable, and unburdened by the metabolic requirements of their giant ancestors spread across the recovering world and filled ecological roles that had been emptied by the extinction. Marine reptiles were gone, and the ocean slowly filled with new forms of life shaped by the conditions of the recovery rather than the conditions that preceded it. Eventually, the world that emerged over the following millions of years did not resemble the world before the impact, because the animals were different, the plants were different, and the distribution of life across the continents was different. So while Earth may not have recovered, it definitely rebuilt itself from the ground up, using whatever was left. The asteroid did not care which animals were the most powerful, the most complex, or the most dominant. It simply came in and reset the game entirely, and the animals that inherited the reset were not the ones that had ruled it, they were the ones that had survived it. So, extinction is not the end of the story, it is only the end of a chapter, and the beginning of one that nobody, including the survivors, could have predicted. The Earth we live on, every ecosystem, every species, every human being, exists because a small group of unremarkable animals sat in burrows in the dark and outlasted the end of the world. That is worth sitting with, and we hope it teaches you something.